All right, now I'm going to go through the structure of the actual theory, and you've got to have down that groundwork of understanding that variation just happens. That's what we understand today as mutation in genetics. But you must understand that Darwin saw variation as inevitable. It's going to happen. The other thing is to understand that each organic being is within its organic and inorganic conditions of life. Those two things. And there's going to be more organisms born than can survive. There are always going to be more born than can survive. And that is going to create a competitive environment. That's the groundwork, okay? Here he spells out how the game is actually played. Those are the ground rules. Here's how it's played. In 5, this is, I told you this with that other gentleman we read. The paragraph 12 was one of the most important paragraphs ever written. 5 is also one of the most important paragraphs ever written. And that should tell you something. You may have figured it out by now. Whom Darwin almost certainly read, and it shows up again in the pages of the book, again and again and again. Not by name, but by rough allusion. He had read Smith. He had a copy of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations on his bookshelf that he had read. He had made a decent fortune off of his investing skills. That's why he was able to breed pigeons and spend a lot of time on this. You will see elements of Smith in here, but there are real differences between the two. The kind of competition you get in social environments that Smith writes about is different in other aspects when it gets to natural selection. So natural selection does come from Smith's idea of competition within free markets. But you're going to see real differences go on with Darwin. And what Darwin did and why he really should occupy the position he does in the biological sciences, which is one of the founding fathers of it, is he, more than anybody, worked out the details of the idea. He ran into problem after problem after problem, and he solved problem after problem after problem. You may hear about a gentleman named Wallace, Alfred Russel Wallace, who did come up with a theory of natural selection. Wallace did not solve all the numerous problems that go into the theory of natural selection. Darwin did respond to them, and in a very effective manner. For example, he replied to what's called Mivart's critique. Mivart spelled out, and this is a very good scientific critique of Darwin, an extremely important one. Mivart said that 5% of a wing doesn't help you. So how do birds fly? And Darwin had an extremely hard time with that. And that was a real question to him and not to Wallace, because Wallace couldn't reply. Darwin did. And if you read the whole book, the 6th edition, he replied to Mivart with getting into how things are, brought over and co-opted to other purposes. We know, for example, birds, we even have a bird on the cover here, that feathers did not evolve for flight because, again, Mivart's critique is correct. 5% of a wing doesn't do any good. Feathers almost certainly, and we have evidence of it evolving on ground animals, were used as a way of keeping warm. And then it was co-opted as a tool for flight after many, many species and many generations had already perfected making feathers for warmth. That is how we responded to those problems. Okay, and so let's go to 5. It may be said that natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing throughout the world every variation, even the slightest, rejecting that which is bad, preserving and adding up all that is good, silently and incessantly working, whenever and wherever opportunity offers, at the improvement of each organic being in relation to its organic and inorganic conditions of life. So you obviously must have paragraph 1 down. You must know that no organic being spends any time outside of its organic and inorganic conditions of life. But then Darwin uses a metaphor. It's as if natural selection is an accountant, adding up that which is good and subtracting that which is bad. Selection is the process of eliminating, taking them out. And you might hear the jokes about the Darwin Awards. Those are the beings that are taken out of the genetic pool. That's what he means here. Selection means you're wiped out. We see nothing of these slow changes in progress until the hand of time, again, his metaphors are magnificent, has marked the long lapses of ages. And then, so imperfect is our view into the long past geological ages, that we see only the forms of life are now different from what they formerly were. Now, this is an important issue within evolutionary theory, because one of the problems is, and I hope this struck you, we see nothing of these slow changes in progress. That's not observation. That's not what Bacon spelled out, and it's certainly not what Popper spelled out. So we see it, and really what Darwin was doing, he spent decades, and he traveled the world on the Beagle, making observation after observation on currently living animals, and currently living plants, and he sent back an enormous number of species back to his, back to his place in England, and he studied them over time, and he inferred how these birds got here, and how these beaks changed, and the finches, and how these butterflies got this way. He had to infer that and work it out through reasoning and logic. He could not observe directly the evolutionary process taking place. He inferred it. A very important element here. Okay, Darwin did not prove evolutionary theory. What he does is he illustrates it. This book is filled with page after page after page with illustrations of, I don't mean drawings, I mean descriptions of how this would work in this animal, how that would work in that plant, and that's what you're going to see for the rest of the reading, is him illustrating it. He's going to select which organism he's going to use to illustrate it. And very important, this does not prove his idea anywhere close to the way that that Popper was talking about. He is finding evidence to demonstrate. Okay, that's the wrong way to go about it. Now, that does not mean evolution is not sound, because Darwin didn't show it to be reliable. Instead, especially during the 20th century, it was subjected to challenge after challenge after challenge, and it stood its ground over and over and over again. When they did derive very good experiments to challenge it, it showed up to be working again and again and again. You may have heard of another theory by Lamarck. That theory was competing with Darwin's, and they were having a magnificent debate, like the little debate you saw between Einstein and Newton. And that one, Newton won out. Why? Or excuse me, Einstein won out. Why? Because it showed itself to be more reliable. In this one, Darwin won out. And then you probably don't know anything about any other theories, because the other ones didn't show to be nearly as reliable in the challenges that took place in the century, or in the 20th century. So Darwin did actually die, not knowing if his theory was in the end that reliable. He did hold on to it. He had illustrated it and showed how it would work, but he had not sufficiently challenged it. Really in the 1920s, when they started to understand genetics, that's when it really took primacy. So in paragraph 6, although natural selection, and this is where he gets to the structure, so keep paragraph 5. Paragraph 5 is the definition. No matter where you go, that's what it is. Okay? That's one of the paragraphs that changed the history of the world, and I mean that literally. Although natural selection can act only through and for the good of each being, yet characters and structures which we are apt to consider as of very trifling importance may thus be acted on. So things that we consider to not be very important might be extraordinarily important. Okay, and that's part of what Bacon talked about with man is not the measure. We might think that doesn't matter. So the fact that penguins have a white belly, that doesn't. Why are they white and black? That's just a tuxedo. That just makes them look good. That's actually absolutely essential when you're swimming in the water, because when you're on land, you're not a target. If you're a penguin, you don't have predators. There aren't real predators on, the Antarctic. There are predators in the water, and when you look up, it's good to have a white belly because you're up against a light sun. And when you look down, it's good to have a black back because your back is against the seafloor. That is something that we might consider to be trifling, but is extraordinarily important for survival. Extraordinarily important for survival. So he goes through the different, and all he does is he illustrates. He is doing what Popper had a problem with. And again, that's the weakness in his writing. But again, don't think it hasn't held up, because it's been challenged enormously. So the first part is that things that we think are not important can be extraordinarily important. Okay. The next aspect of the theory. Now there are two aspects of the theory in paragraph 7. There's the definition in 5, and then what I'm going to go through are the branches of the theory. The first one is 5. The trifling can be very important. We must not forget that climate, food, etc. probably produces some slight indirect effect. That is the other aspect of the theory, that part. That climate or food can have an effect, not the struggle for existence. And the example for me to illustrate it is flamingos are pink. But that happens because they eat shrimp. So if you feed a flamingo, chocolate donuts, you're going to have a brown flamingo. That's what you're going to have, because their feathers absorb, the melanin or the coloring from the food it eats. They are naturally white. So that color is not the process of selection. That's the process of food. So skin colors can change of human beings in sun. That's not a selection thing. So the actual color itself isn't the selection. The color is the effect of the environment. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part of this paragraph is a little bit complicated, but let me touch on it kind of quickly here. It is, however, far more necessary to bear in mind that there are many unknown laws of correlation of growth. That is the other aspect of this paragraph. He does not illustrate either of these aspects in 7. Correlations of growth are things like you might get a species whose fur color is actually extraordinarily important. That this bunny rabbit needs to be white in the snow to survive. Well, a correlation of growth is eye color. You won't get green-eyed bunnies that are white. You will get blue eyes. Blue eyes go with white fur. That gene gets carried along with, in a correlation of growth manner, gets carried along with the coloration of fur. So those two characteristics, even though eye color is not selected for, hair color is, and hair color is connected to eye color. That's what he's talking about. So what we've got in paragraph 6, we have one element of natural selection. That's things that we think are trifling are actually important. Then we have food, climate can produce a direct effect. That's a second aspect. Third is you have to watch out for characteristics could sometimes be correlated. In other words, have been carried along with other characteristics. Okay? And now 8, you're going to get to the fourth element, the fourth structural part of the theory. As we have seen, those variations which occur under domestication appear at any particular period of life, tend to reappear in the offspring at that same period. That means certain characteristics happen at certain periods in life. They might not be there when the being is first, comes to life, but they might be there when the being is about 4 years old, or say, 2 months, or they will come at different periods of life. That is different than the 2 elements you saw in 7 and different than 6. So the period of life, you will see certain characteristics at certain periods. So in a state of nature, natural selection will be enabled to act on and modify organic beings at any age. So in other words, by the accumulation of profitable variation at that age, and by their inheritance at a corresponding age. So certain characteristics are better at certain ages, okay? And that's what he's writing about there. Now let me jump up. I got to move a little bit faster here. And I'll jump up to 9. And what he does, and what I've highlighted, by the way, are the main ideas. I haven't highlighted the illustration. If you get the main ideas, you've got it. The illustration gives it force and makes it clear. Natural selection will modify the structure of the young in relation to the parent, and of the parent in relation to the young. Now, that's another aspect, that sentence. So it will create something in the appearance that don't help the parent necessarily, but help the parent help the young. Now, the obvious example of this is like breasts in adult females. That isn't there to help the adult female survive. That's there so the adult female can care for the young. The other aspects are, in certain animals, the strength of the adult male is so over-exaggerated that it becomes a survival threat. The way I could illustrate that is the size of the male lion. The male lion is too big to really hunt that effectively. It can fight, but most animals can get away from an adult male. The adult male is so large that it can protect its pride. That is a structural element of the male, the adult, in relationship to the young who need protection from beings like hyenas, leopards, and other animals, and the adult male can take care of that. That structure, the muscularity and the size of the adult male is not there for the adult male. Okay? So, and then he has the next sentence. In social animals, it will adapt the structure of each individual for the benefit of the community, if in consequence profits by the selected change. So these are social animals, and many animals are not social, so they won't have these attributes. But when you think about social animals such as zebras, and you think of their, major characteristic of the stripes, those stripes on zebras are very hard to focus on as long as you have a herd. If you have one, the stripes make you stand out. If you have all of these different zebras, you suddenly have a characteristic that works in a social environment. And that is not an old in relation to the young. That's a social structure, a characteristic that is socially determined. So that shows you that evolution works on the individual level to benefit the whole society, the whole species. A structure used only once in an animal's whole life, if of high importance to it, might be modified to any extent by natural selection. There can be some characteristics that are only used once, but you know what? That made all the difference in the world. Okay? And let me go down and I'll take a quick couple comments on sexual selection. And he says here, it depends not on a struggle for existence, but on a struggle between the males for possession of the females. The result is not death to the unsuccessful competitor, but few or no offspring. Now, this is the other aspect of natural selection. You don't die if you don't reproduce, but you didn't reproduce. Your genetic codes and your characteristics are not going to be carried forward. And this makes two elements of natural selection absolutely essential: survival and reproduction. Okay? So obviously you don't reproduce unless you survive, but if you survive and don't reproduce, Darwin says that's useless, that nothing happened. So that is sexual selection within natural selection. And you'll see it primarily amongst the males within a species. They will compete with each other for size, for strength, but also appearance. And we see that especially in birds. Okay? I'll hold there. Take care, you guys.